My wife sat across from me at our kitchen table one evening and asked with a level of calm that told me she'd been rehearsing this conversation for a while, whether I'd be okay with her seeing another man, someone she'd reconnected with, someone she wanted one final chance to explore something with, before fully committing to spending the rest of her life only with me. I said yes. What Melissa didn't expect was that my yes came with a quiet, carefully considered plan of my own. My name's Adam. My wife Melissa and I had been married 9 years. For most of that time, things had genuinely been solid. Not perfect, but the kind of steady partnership I'd always assumed would carry us through whatever came next. About a year before that kitchen table conversation, Melissa reconnected with a college boyfriend, David, through a mutual friend's social media post. What started as occasional catching-up messages gradually became something more frequent, more emotionally involved over the following months. I noticed the shift, Melissa checking her phone more, a certain distance creeping into our own conversations, evenings where she seemed present physically but clearly somewhere else, mentally. I didn't confront her aggressively during that year. I asked general questions, expressed general concerns, and largely got reassurance that nothing inappropriate was happening, just reconnecting with an old friend. I chose, for reasons I've examined plenty since, to give her the benefit of the doubt longer than probably made sense in hindsight. The conversation at our kitchen table came after several weeks of Melissa seeming increasingly distracted and emotionally unavailable. She explained, with what felt like genuine internal conflict, that she'd been struggling with unresolved feelings about her relationship with David from years earlier, and that she felt she needed closure in a way that simply talking about it hadn't provided. What she was asking, specifically, was for my permission to spend time with David in a way that would let her fully resolve those old feelings, framing it as something that would ultimately strengthen our marriage by removing lingering uncertainty rather than threatening it. I want to be honest that my internal reaction wasn't calm agreement. It was closer to quiet devastation, mixed with a strange, clarifying kind of relief that at least the vague tension of the past year finally had an honest, specific shape to it, rather than remaining an ambiguous drift I couldn't quite name. I told her, after a long pause, "Okay, yes." I didn't explain my reasoning in that moment. I simply agreed, watched her visible relief at my response, and let the conversation end there for the night. I want to be clear about something important. My yes wasn't some elaborate trap designed to catch her in something forbidden. It was genuine permission, freely given because I'd concluded, sitting with the request over the following days, that a marriage sustained only through my own quiet, uncommunicated anxiety wasn't actually a marriage I wanted to continue holding together through sheer avoidance. What I did, in the days following that conversation, was schedule an appointment with a family law attorney, not to file anything immediately, but to fully understand my actual position, financially, legally, practically, in case this arrangement confirmed what I suspected it eventually would, that Melissa's feelings for David weren't simply old, unresolved closure-seeking, but something considerably more current and significant. I also began, quietly and without confrontation, documenting the practical realities of our life together that I'd need clear information about, regardless of how things unfolded: our joint accounts, our home's equity, retirement contributions, the kind of unglamorous paperwork nobody wants to organize during a healthy marriage, but which suddenly felt urgently necessary. Melissa spent time with David over the following several weeks, details I didn't ask for, and she didn't volunteer beyond general logistics. I maintained our household routines during this time: work, managing our son's school schedule, ordinary domestic life, while privately continuing my own quiet preparation, gathering financial documentation, and consulting further with my attorney about various possible scenarios. I want to emphasize that I wasn't performing calm indifference as some kind of manipulation tactic. I was genuinely trying to give Melissa the space she'd asked for, while simultaneously refusing to simply wait passively for whatever conclusion she eventually reached, without having my own clear understanding of where I stood regardless of her decision. About 5 weeks into this arrangement, Melissa came to me one evening, visibly emotional, explaining that her time with David had actually clarified something different than she'd expected. Not renewed old feelings exactly, but a clearer recognition, that she'd been using David as an escape from deeper dissatisfaction with herself and her own life circumstances, dissatisfaction that had very little to do with me specifically. This is where my next move actually became relevant. I told Melissa, calmly but directly, that I appreciated her honesty about what she'd actually discovered, but that the past several weeks had also clarified something important for me. I could no longer continue a marriage built on my own silent anxiety and her unaddressed emotional drift, regardless of how this specific situation with David resolved. I showed her the documentation I'd quietly organized, not as a threat, but as evidence of how seriously I'd taken the possibility that our marriage might genuinely be ending, and how unprepared I'd been, emotionally and practically, heading into that uncertainty a year earlier when the drift first started. I told her, I said yes to your request because I'd already decided I wasn't willing to hold this marriage together through my own quiet fear anymore. If you'd chosen David, I would have been ready to move forward with a clear, informed separation. Since you're telling me you haven't, I need us to actually address what's been happening for the past year, honestly, in couples counseling, rather than just quietly returning to how things were before this conversation ever happened. Melissa was, understandably, somewhat shaken by seeing the concrete extent of my preparation, not angry exactly, more sobered by the reality that my calm yes hadn't reflected passive acceptance, but a genuine, clear-eyed willingness to let the marriage end if that's where things led. We did begin couples counseling shortly after, working through not just the David situation specifically, but the broader pattern of emotional distance that had allowed that situation to develop in the first place. It wasn't a quick fix. We spent the better part of a year in that process, honestly confronting things about our individual expectations and communication patterns that we'd both been avoiding for far too long. Melissa and I are still married, 2 years past that kitchen table conversation, in a relationship that looks considerably more honest and intentional than it did during the drift that preceded it. I don't think either of us would recommend the specific path we took to get here, but I also don't regret my yes that night, or the quiet preparation that came with it. What I learned, more than anything, is that genuine calm in a crisis isn't about pretending you don't care what happens. It's about making sure that whatever happens, you're not facing it from a position of blind hope alone. My next move wasn't designed to punish Melissa for asking a difficult question. It was designed to make sure that regardless of her answer, I'd be standing on solid ground rather than quiet denial. If this story got to you, the next one is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.